Welcome to Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam Silberstein is a clinical psychologist who has been working in the field since 1993. With a broad range of clinical experience, including state psychiatric hospitals, adolescent residential treatment with a trauma focus, the Department of Corrections, and in the addiction treatment arena. He is currently in private practice and is the clinical director and co-founder of Westside Treatment, a young adult dual diagnosis treatment facility in West LA. This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there is an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.
I just met with Beck Gee Cohen. He's the director of the LGBTQI programming at Visions Adolescent Treatment Center. And I really encourage you to give this podcast a very close listen. My interest was, please help me understand. I'm a clinician, I'm a psychologist, I work with people. Help me understand how to be informed and helpful to individuals who have any range of issues related to anything sexuality, anything related to gender. And what he taught me is the importance of listening and examining my own biases and bringing to the table a safe curiosity and questioning that lends to safety and connection. And there's an artistic, skillful safety about Beck that helped me to understand what I know, what I don't know, and how to move forward and help people. So I hope you enjoy it. Hi, good morning. I am so honored. I have Beck Gee Cohen. He is the director of LGBTQI programming at Visions Adolescent Treatment Center, and is a very interesting guest to me because Beck is an expert in the LGBTQI community. What an interesting experience. For the last decade, Beck has trained numerous facilities on LGBTQI best practices, has been a keynote presenter at many conferences, and has facilitated workshops about LGBTQI trauma, adolescence, gender, and sexuality. But for me, I have so much to say so often, and I want to start this off with humility. I'm speaking to someone who is expert on sexual identity, gender issues, transgender issues, and I am someone who wants to learn here, right? And I don't want to come in with if people have listened to me in the past, I've got a lot to say. And in this space, I want to be more of a student. But I do have some thoughts. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm looking at you being very nervous right now.
Me?
Yes.
Oh,
it's okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna get through this together.
We're gonna get through this, and I'm mostly nervous about how is the best way to present this information in a way that's going to be helpful, both to everybody listening. And I have so many ideas about that. And for me, I'm thinking as a trained clinical psychologist, right? What is it that I need to know, right, to be informed, and also at the same time to know what I don't know?
Right. Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people who walk on eggshells around this topic, and that is a big issue in and of itself that, well, we're going to not talk about it, but I want you to be in the room, in the space with me. And as a person who is part of the community, I know when a clinician is walking on eggshells around the conversation. And it's much like, I like to use the analogy, it's much like when you're going to another country and you don't know the language. And the way to do that, the way to start is by learning just little bits of it, right? The please, the thank you, where's the bathroom, those kinds of things. And that shows respect. And it also shows like humility and saying, I maybe don't have all the answers, or I don't know everything, and I'm so willing to be here. As a person in the community, when I have a therapist who knows, or a therapist, a friend, a family member that comes in and says, I don't know, but I'm learning, and this is what I heard about, can we have a conversation? I'm more apt to be drawn in and have that connection with someone.
Am I doing a good job?
You are.
Excellent.
You are.
Excellent. I want to be, so that's my intention. So for the record, I don't want to walk on eggshells. I want to be a person who can be straight up and say, hey, there's so much I don't know. There's so much I don't know. Help. And help me to be a helper, right?
Correct.
And so this is a podcast that's called Getting Better with Dr. Adam. Cute, right? And the idea is, how do we get better as clinicians? How do we get better so we can help people? And who are we helping, and how do we help? So maybe it will be good if you just told us a little bit about you. How did you arrive at this work?
Sure. Well, my story. A quick breakdown of my story. I have been doing this for about 10 years now. However, I've been in the community for such a long time, and I never actually expected my career and my life to be enmeshed as it is. And actually, I've tried to run away from it a couple of times because it can get so overwhelming. And however, I just keep coming back to it. And so I know that I really believe that I was born to do this work. I am a person in recovery, and that's here nor there. But I think that what happened to me when I got into recovery was that I really found myself. And I came out in high school as gay, and had a really bad therapeutic experience at that point in time. And so I wasn't really fond of therapists at all, and got into my addiction, and ended up getting sober. And what happened for me there was that I was able to go back to school. And so I studied sociology with an emphasis on gender and sexuality, and then got into a master's degree program for addiction studies. And then what happened is I started working for an LGBTQ organization at the same time. And I was 5 years sober when I came out as trans. And I was actually, just a bit of my story is that I was suicidal, and I was 5 years sober. And I went to a therapist, finally.
A better one.
A better therapist, yeah. A better therapist. And I really equate the work that she did with saving my life. She was not transgender. She was not part of the LGBT community. She was a versed trauma therapist who had education in LGBTQ issues. And so that, with that experience and kind of how my career path has gone, I go into facilities and train them and help other therapists to learn about that process. And actually, a couple of years ago, my old therapist and I actually got to do a workshop together about what that meant.
The original one?
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Not the first one.
Not the first one.
No.
The savior.
No, the the woman
the
who
lifesaver.
the lifesaver. Yeah, she, her and I were able to do a workshop together about what it meant to be a therapist who was not in the community, and then me being an advocate for the community. It was a really beautiful experience.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you can draw on your own experience and your work with others. Mm-hmm. I like to talk about yesterday I did a group, and in my group I was so invested in helping people understand the internal life of panic and anxiety. Like, it's just so lost in what is the experiencer? Mm-hmm. What is it like to have a panic attack and worry you're going to have a panic attack, and in body and mind and focus and preoccupation? It's so distressing. Mm-hmm. And I wanted that to come alive. So there was an appreciation for not just throwing out the word panic. Like, oh, it sounds like, oh, panic disorder. Just breathe in a different way and
Right.
do some exposure therapy. It'll all go away. There's a suffering element.
Right.
So when you, if you had to, and words are difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't necessarily capture things well. What's the experience of an individual, right, who is going through life, right, confused, questioning, being told a lot of things from society,
Mm-hmm.
saying, I'm going to come out and announce that I'm gay, right? Only to find myself suicidal,
Right.
several years later, many drugs later,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's the internal life of that individual?
Yeah. So I only have my experience, and I think that in the experience of my clients, I think there's a common thread. I don't like to do a broad stroke. However, I'll just say in my experience of coming out, I also had a piece of like societal, like I grew up in a pretty religious Catholic household, and so I had that right. I had God who was like, don't do this. Not actually God. It was actually priests who were saying don't do this, and then I had my own and struggles with like if I come out, like who's gonna love me? I think that there's this like this deep feeling of and it's my experience and the experience of some people that I work with that if I come out, if I share who I am, if I show all of me, you won't love me, and it's a common theme. And so there's like I think there's a lot of really deep, almost untouchable loneliness that comes with that. And so why wouldn't a community like use drugs and alcohol? Why wouldn't we go seek validation elsewhere? Why wouldn't we seek to fill that loneliness? And in my experience, it's been uh, with my clients how to when they're in the process of coming out, how do I make them okay? And
So when you
it's
say
difficult.
coming out, are you
Yes.
talking about any form of coming out and announcing, I'm gay, or is it specific?
Yeah, it's specific to gender and sexuality. I think I come from the lens that gender and sexuality are really a foundational part of a human being. I don't think that a lot of us get to think about that in that way. I think that LGBTQ people have to think about it in that way, and it's like constantly on our mind, especially I mean young people when they're in that process of coming out. It's very front of mind, and so it can, if I'm hiding myself, if I'm hiding from who I am or I'm hiding from others, it can be detrimental. It can cause depression, it can cause anxiety and all of those things. So the coming out process is really about like coming out to myself and then coming out to others.
So help educate us,
Yeah.
discerning the difference between gender and sexuality
Sure.
and the challenge of the community,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's two things.
Right. Yeah. So to put it in the very easiest of terms is gender is who I go to bed as, and sexuality is who I go to bed with. Right. So keeping it simple. I mean, obviously, there's much more to that, but I think that what happens in the LGBTQ community is that everything gets conflated. And so trans people specifically kind of get lumped into that piece. And we're not really we're talking about sexual minorities and gender minorities and and I separate it out because I mean we have to. And there's a lot of heterosexual transgender people. There's a lot of, and there's a lot of LGBTQ, LGBTQ transgender people. So separating those two out helps a therapist kind of and a clinician and a family saying, okay, you're trans doesn't mean you're gay, right? And that can get consistently misconstrued. So like I'm trying to think about how to explain this, but LGBTQ without a PowerPoint in front of me.
Uh-huh.
But I think that for therapists just to kind of know that. So when we're talking about gay people or when we're talking about trans people, it doesn't automatically mean their sexuality. We have to ask separate questions around sexuality as opposed to gender.
Right. So who I want to sleep with is, I like that, and who I go to sleep as.
Right.
Right, is a great starting point. And also the message is, what I'm hearing is, and I'll use this word with quotes, them.
Right.
Right. Them, it happens to be, they're not one and they are not one and the same.
Right.
That community, LGBTQI, right? That community is not them. That community has different dimensions and different presentations and different struggles within.
Right.
And it just so happens that they're part of the same community, right? And supportive of one another.
Sometimes. Yeah.
You made there was a face.
There was a face, yes.
So what's the face?
The face is that
you called out my face. I have to call out your face.
The face is that for example, when we had all of the conversations around marriage equality, there was so much money going into marriage equality for same-sex marriage, right? And so now that that's kind of over and done, the trans community, is suffering, and there's no money going into the trans community. So you'll have people who will broad stroke saying LGBTQ rights, and trans rights are far, far behind. Intersex rights are far, far behind. So it's not like all this rainbow sparkle glitter, and it can be, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of struggles within the community. 19 trans women of color have been murdered this year alone, and no one's talking about it. I like to compare that with everyone knows who Matthew Shepard is from 20 years ago, and he was a gay, white, cisgender male, and it's a horrible murder no matter what. I mean, I remember it viscerally when that happened. But people were out in droves. People were out in the streets. There were, legislations being made because of that, hate crime laws, right? But who's caring about trans women, specifically trans women of color? So there is a lot of kind of, there's a lot of tug and war, in the community as well.
And a long way to go.
But
if I look at the community, the gay community, right, they've done a great job over time. It took a long time. Do you feel optimistic about the trans community?
I have to. I have to feel optimistic around the trans community because, I'm part of it, and I do my part, and my hope, I have to live in hope because despair will just take me down. And I have to be realistic, right? It's how, who are the voices am I listening to? What's going on? What's happening in the young people that I have coming in my office who are trans and the pain that they're going through? How do I help the families to be part of the relationship with their kid, living in their authentic truth and self? So I have to do my part, and that's all I can do.
So I want to go back a little bit, and I appreciate that just an advocate, part of advocacy is I have to show up. I can't control the outcome, but I still have to do my part, and that's what I'm hearing. If I was born identified as a boy, right? I didn't, sent to Little League, right? That's just what I did. I didn't think otherwise. I didn't really know to think. It wasn't on my radar. It wasn't coming up for me. Maybe you're not, right? Maybe there's some, what am I? What am I? That sounds like a meditation question.
Right?
That's like a funky meditation. Yeah. Who am I? Who is the I? Who is the witness? Right? It was so matter of fact. Right? So I'm wondering if I'm on the right track here. Help me if I'm saying it right. What if I said, what am I? Right? What is my identity? What is my gender identity? And it wasn't obvious.
Right.
Or, right, what if it wasn't obvious, or it was, I can't say what I'm feeling?
Yeah. I mean, that's a common question for a lot of questioning people, around their gender identity. I think, you have the privilege of being assigned male at birth. You identify as male and you walk through your life as male. And one thing I want to just kind of say too is that a lot of the times we're talking about gender and sexuality and only as it pertains to the LGBTQ community, but I think we need to be talking about gender and sexuality as it pertains to all of the community. Uh, you know, People who are straight, people who are not trans, because we're in a crisis of gender right now, and masculinity and femininity and all of those things. I mean, so I think what happens when trans people talk about gender, or non-binary people are kind of putting gender in your face in that way, it's like I have to reflect on my own.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, and when I talk to clinicians all the time, I'm like, this really isn't about, it's not transgender issues. It's like your issues with transgender people, right?
Mhm.
It's like, I don't have any issue. I mean, I have my own issues, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, but I mean, me being trans is not an issue for me. It's your issues coming
Mhm.
inward. And that's what gender dysphoria actually is. The change in the DSM is external factors coming in, causes my dysphoria.
So external factors, meaning somebody being critical, somebody being prejudiced,
Hmm. Not being able to find a
societal
job. Yeah.
societal discrimination,
Right.
full on discrimination.
Right.
It's not my issue.
Right.
It's I have no issue, right?
Right.
I have no issue. It's the what is society doing as a result of who I am,
Right.
right?
And how do I walk in the world? How am I going to be accepted in the world, and all of those things?
I identify in a certain way. I'll share with you. I used to be morbidly obese.
Hmm.
And I've shared this before, and I get a lot of, and I became very versed at being friends with girls,
Hmm.
right? I was one of the girls.
Hmm.
And that's what I was told, right? And the truth is I am friends with girls.
Right.
And I get along very well with women on a friendship level. I feel like I would be reincarnated in some ways as a 17-year-old adolescent girl.
Okay.
Right? Like I can read
Yeah,
the books.
great.
We're sharing the same books. I
Yeah.
love Fault in Our Stars. I can do it,
Yeah.
right? I can go there. And I wonder as I'm listening, right? Retrospective analysis, right? Is that part of the broader and made fun of, right?
Mhm.
Made fun of for being that guy who hangs out with girls in that way.
Hmm.
And I wonder if part of a broader discussion that you're saying it's not unique to one community, LGBTQI, right?
Right.
It's not that. It's a broader discussion of how we treat gender assignment,
Hmm.
right? And how I interface with it,
Hmm.
right? So if I'm apologizing for that, right? If I'm apologizing for that,
Hmm.
and that speaks to a societal definition of what it means to be quote unquote normal guy.
Hmm.
Does that resonate?
I think, yeah, I mean, it resonates, and it's the whole topic. I mean, it's so, like you said, it's like so broad of a topic, and it's how do I walk in the world, and as, I mean, for example, I'll give an example. It's like I had a group of young men, like across the board. They were trans guys, and they were like 16, 17 years old, and we're in a horseshoe kind of group setting, and I have a trans masculine person over here for just for purposes of having this conversation. He was taking hormones, he had had top surgery, he identified as male, and he was male, and he was talking about how he didn't feel male enough,
Mhm.
right? And would he ever be seen as male, and having this. And so we kind of go around. And then the last guy on the direct other side, cisgender male, which is, a cisgender male is assigned male at birth, lives as male. Cisgender straight male, 16-year-old, talking about how he doesn't feel male enough around because he doesn't fit into the stereotypes of being a jock, being good at sports. He loved art. He loved The Fault in Our Stars. And so what we would, I think as a society say like a beta male, right?
Mhm.
Not an alpha male, whatever that is, and just having those two experiences across from each other
Mhm.
and not feeling male enough is the bigger conversation, right?
Right.
That's the bigger conversation around gender as a whole, of like, what are the expectations placed on me by society, family, media, all of those things, and how complicated it is, and how constricting
Mm.
gender is. I like to say gender is trauma. So it's,
Well,
in and of
well,
itself.
when you have an imposed
Right.
expectation, right, and you're not playing by those rules,
Right.
right, and you're not living that standard, it
Right.
invites less than. So I'm wondering, I'm as a clinician, as a therapist, is this a good entry point of conversation, right? The less than as a man or the less than as a woman,
Right.
right? Because I have it all the time. I mean, when I do groups and the original assumption is how many people have body issue image, in a group, and like you expect the women to raise their hand and the men don't, but the men raise their hand.
Right.
All of them, not all of them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not living up to a certain standard of look, of presentation. I'm not being feminine enough, right? What's helpful to me is that's the beginning of the broader conversation.
Yeah, and I say the same thing. Like, if I could change, if I had a room full of 100 people and I said, if you could change something about your body, would you? Right? Would you have surgery? Would you whatever? And I would say 100 people, maybe 99 would raise their hand, right? The other person would just be lying. But everyone has something that they would want to change about themselves. And it's interesting that you talked about, just even your own story, but transitioning and gender affirmation surgery and is the only surgery that you have to have therapist notes besides gastric bypass, right? That you have to go through hoops of mental health to have those change. So like one of the privileges of people wanting to get nose jobs, boob jobs, or whatever, they can go and get them. But trans people have to prove that they are mentally, psychologically perfect, basically. They can't have depression. They can't have anxiety, even though all of these things are like producing anxiety and depression. And they have to basically almost be dishonest to get what they need.
So
to
the
live.
base assumption in that is here you're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
You're struggling. You're born.
You're assigned.
Assigned
Yeah.
a gender.
Mhm.
This isn't me. This isn't me, right?
Right.
I'm trying to identify with the experience. This isn't me,
Right.
right? I can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I can do something about it proudly,
Mhm.
right? I don't have to do the walk of shame,
Right.
right? I could get support, and I could make this decision, and I'm being told, hold on, you might be fucking crazy.
Right.
You might be fucking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, are you kidding? This is what I'm saying. I'm the voice of the medical community.
Right.
Are you kidding?
Right.
You're going to do that?
Right.
That's a big, big thing to do. And it's permanent.
It's permanent.
And therefore, just like, right, nose jobs are too,
Mhm.
right? Right, nose jobs are too. But if you're going to make that type of decision, you really might be unwell,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you're saying, what are you talking about,
Right.
right? Everybody has everybody, or not everybody, but potentially internal discussions of identity, and as far as gender, is not bizarre.
Right. Or they should be having those conversations with themselves. Every client that I have, no matter where they are in their sexuality or gender identity, I'm asking them what that means to them. That's something that we have conversation about in the room. Whether they're straight, I'm like, what does that mean for you? And no one has really ever had to think about that. Specifically, mostly like straight people with privilege. It's almost like you have to bring in your privilege as a therapist into the room. So if I'm working with, a person of color, if I'm talking about privilege and race and all those things, I want to bring it in the room because it's there, right? So if someone I'm working with is straight or cisgender and not trans, I'm going to say, well, what does gender mean to you? What does masculinity mean to you? What does it mean to be a man for you? And I get a lot of, especially with teenagers, they're like, what the fuck? Why are you talking like that to me? But a lot of them, when you start having that conversation, they actually want to have the conversation. Like, what does that mean for me? And like, what are the messages that you receive, and how is that leading to a happy life, and to, or how is it like basically a prison, and I talk a lot about young men because like right now it's just, young men are really on my mind with all the things that they're doing in the world, outwardly. Their anger and their shame and all that stuff is being outwardly.
So I'm a
shown.
therapist. I'm doing intake,
Mhm.
right? And I want to be sensitive. I want to make sure I'm asking, what does gender mean to you,
Mhm.
right? I'm asking about sexual orientation. I'm asking about gender identity,
Mhm.
right? And I throw in the question to it. Let's say I have a 16-year-old young man, and I say, what does being a man mean to you? And this person is saying, well, and I'm listening closely, especially after this, and he says to me at that point, he's identifying and he says, I don't know. A part of me doesn't, I feel this is like this isn't me.
Mhm.
This isn't me. And I actually see myself as female,
Mhm.
right? I see myself as female. Stop the film, right? Stop the film. And we were talking about before we got in here, right? And I want to go to this. We said, what is the oh no therapist?
Right.
Right? You're a therapist. One, what is the, I'm at that moment, right? And I want to know what I know. I want to know what I don't know. I want to be supportive. I want to do the right thing,
Mhm.
right? I don't want to be the medical community coming in and saying, that's not true. I don't want to shut and invalidate, right? I don't want to start the process of, oh, you need help,
Right.
right? In that way, you need help because you're so messed up.
Right.
So give us an example of the oh no therapist,
Okay.
and give us an example of solid work.
The oh no therapist would avoid completely and go, well, we can talk about that later, right? Especially like if like I think of treatment specifically, like, well, let's get sober first and then deal with that later, right? We have to deal with the most pressing issue, and if that's a pressing issue, and if it's not, like, I mean, I think it's just exploring, right, and opening up and recognizing. I think a therapist, like the therapist I talked about, is like the humble therapist, where it's like, okay, maybe I don't know what I'm doing right now. Maybe this is the first client that I've had that this has happened. I need to seek supervision
Right.
around it. Maybe do some work and I mean, there's so much out there online.
Mhm.
Knowing what you're reading, first of all, because I can, if I believe, this is how I work with families, is like, if I believe my kid is trans, I'll find research to back that up. If I think that my kid is not trans, I'll find research to back that up.
Mhm.
So we have to be able to do that. I think the oh no therapist will shut it down, be like, oh, that's what everyone thinks, like, and you can normalize it. You can
Can I give
normalize
an
it.
example
Yeah.
of an oh no therapist? Ready?
Yeah.
Oh, that's contagious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
isn't that a big? Oh, that's really popular these days.
That's popular these days. Oh, it's trendy to be trans, right?
You live in LA? Oh, cool.
Yeah, right.
Awesome. It must be great.
Right. Everyone's trans. All these kids. What kind of shows are you watching? Is that influencing you? Those kinds of things. And it's like, yes, and maybe, who knows? But if you don't allow that space to have that conversation, because first of all, if someone is coming to you and says that to you, I think that for the most part, you've already built a therapeutic relationship with them. Not many people will come out just like out of the blue. Well, that's kind of a lie. No, I did. That therapist I was telling you about, I went to, I went to her and she's like, so how are things going? I'm like, I'm trans. Like, that was the first thing. But I already knew that she had kind of, I mean, I knew her background. I had really good resources to know that she would be appropriate to handle that. But for the most part, when someone comes out to me, it's like, it's not going to be, there's going to be some kind of safety that they feel in the room. So it's your responsibility as a therapist to
preserve
hold that. Yeah, absolutely.
To preserve that. And we were talking before we started about an oh no therapist moment where I say, well, what would your priest say?
Right.
That's an oh-no
That's
therapist.
an oh no therapist. Yeah.
That's an oh-no therapist.
Right.
So the oh-yeah therapist,
Right.
the oh-yeah therapist, right, first of all, must do their own work.
Right.
Right? Even before you get there, if I'm part of the community that says this is needs explanation to be quote unquote endorsed okay,
Right.
right? That's very not good.
Right.
Right? I'm bringing my own stuff. So I got to know I got to know where I stand with it before I even walk in the room. Because if somebody comes my way and I'm like, well, did you go through the procedures yet? I'm already coming in with a bias, right? I'm bringing my own baggage. Secondly, I'm listening. I'm listening and I'm not telling and I'm not dismissing and I'm not running away.
Right.
I'm in the room, right? And they know I'm in the room. And if I'm comfortable, right, and I'm secure, they're going to feel that.
Right.
Right. So sometimes I think when we train people, it's not so much about the language specifically, yes, and it's also about my stance.
Right.
And my stance is I ain't moving.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that I know, like I said earlier, is like I know when a therapist is walking on eggshells or someone is walking on eggshells around me. Maybe they find out that I'm trans. I feel very grateful to kind of walk in a space and walk in a world where I get seen as male, and
So can I tell you mine was I'm going to get exposed as not knowing enough.
is not getting, yeah.
No, I'm not informed enough.
Right.
So my issue is, oh my God, I'm going to get caught.
Right.
I'm going to get caught not knowing.
Right. And I think the idea that a therapist or clinician knows it all is ridiculous, right? But, oh my goodness, we're human, right?
The psychology
And we don't know.
police are going to say,
Right.
how come you didn't take that continuing ed and read it carefully enough?
Right. Right. when in fact, like, unless you're in a program that is like has an LGBTQ track, which there's only one in the country, I think, right now.
Oh, so I'm good?
Yeah, I think you're good. is that but if you're in like when I was in school in my master's degree program, I had 1 day of LGBTQ. Right. That was it.
It's like kind of like substance use issues in medical school.
Right. They
like
get
certain
4
things
hours.
that get neglected.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to come at you with a question. Not come at you in an aggressive way, but I'm going to throw out a question.
Yeah.
So, and we kind of touched on this. I think it's really important. If I did 1,000 interviews, right, and I said to you, "It's great. I'm glad we're focusing on this." I'm not seeing it.
Mm.
This is an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
This is an outlier. I'm not seeing it. I see anxiety. I see depression. I see people who are gay. I see people who have trauma, right? You would say what? Meaning, I know we're putting all this emphasis on it, right? I'm
About
not seeing
gender
it.
identity.
About gender identity.
So if you have a client, then you're seeing all of these factors.
I see so many diagnoses, right?
Yeah.
Where's this? Where's this been?
Right. Where's this
Right? Why are we pouring in more resource on something, right? And please hear me. I'm trying to be the devil's advocate of it's not my opinion.
I know, because you're getting louder.
Yes, I'm trying to channel.
Yeah,
I'm trying to channel patriarchy medical community.
Right.
Right. There's certain cancers that don't get the same funding because they don't have the same. They don't have the same stats. They're just not there. Right. Breast cancer gets a lot of attention. Lung cancer gets a lot of attention. Right. So what would you say to that?
I just want to clarify. So if I have a client that comes in and I'm seeing all of these things, but I'm just seeing all these other things.
Other things. I don't say pica, like pica, from the DSM pica where you eat weird stuff, right? Like I don't see it. I don't see it. So we're not having in our clinic specialized training on pica. Okay. Maybe we should, right? But as time and resource.
Right.
So how do you respond to this? How do you respond to what I just said?
Well, if you're not seeing it, especially around gender identity, you need to be opening your eyes a little bit more. And that doesn't mean that, because all the time, I will tell you all the time, I will have a facility call me and say, we have a trans client right now. We don't know what we're doing. Can you help us? And I was like, okay, sure. Like, what can I do? We can do a staff training, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, we'll do a training, in a week or whatever, or 2 weeks or a month. Never get a call. And then 6 months down the line. So we did okay with that client.
Mm-hmm.
We think we did okay, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I would love to see what that client would say, actually.
Uh-huh.
And then they'll be like, but we have another client coming in. We have to do a training. Can you help us? And it's like,
Joint commissions, our accreditation says
Right.
that we need to be competent. Can you please come in
Right.
so we can check that box?
or you know what? We did one training, and so now we're totally competent. And so now we're going to have a track, and we're going to serve this community because we had one training. And so that's the common theme.
So back to the question. I hear 2 points that you're making.
Yeah.
One is that if we're not seeing it, hey, it could be your diagnostics. It could be that your diagnostics aren't doing a good job.
Are we asking the question?
Are we asking the question? And secondly, don't jump to competence based on one training,
No, never.
right?
Never.
Don't jump to,
I don't even claim, to be honest, like I do this work on the regular. This is why
Uh-huh.
I'm on this show. And I don't even I hate the word competence. I am still learning. I still learn I go to all the trainings I can because I learn more.
right? So the real student doesn't end when school,
No.
you're a student of life.
You are.
There's no such thing as mastery
Right.
in something that's not masterable.
No, in people,
Right?
you can't be a mastery in people in the human condition. Like there's no way to do that. But you can continue to to learn and to open up and to have these dialogues and to have these conversations, and it's okay to not know what you don't know.
So
But don't work with a client if you
if you have no idea what you're doing.
if you have no idea.
Right.
I think,
I'm not going to treat someone with something that is out of my scope, right? Entirely out of my scope. Right. So we, the facility I work in, we don't treat eating disorders. We don't treat primary eating disorders. It's
Right.
not our area.
Right.
Primary, right? We don't do that. And we know when it's time to take a step back and say it's not our place anymore.
Right.
We definitely know that. So I'm interested. I like the line of, I like the humility approach. I
Mhm.
like the asking the questions. You said before we started that, to sort of finish this question up, it's way more than we think it is. So I came at you with, hey, it's an outlier.
Right.
It's like some sort of, peculiar cancer that we had 3 cases of.
Right.
And you gave me a statistic. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, there's a statistic that came out that about 52% of 14 to 24-year-olds are identifying as non-heterosexual. Now, this has nothing to do with gender identity, but I think that what we're seeing now with that 52%, and that is a time of like exploration and identifying and questioning,
Mhm.
and we are in 2019. We're having a bigger conversation on sexuality as fluid, gender as fluid, and kind of like exploring those things. When I work with young people, having a trans person in a group with a young person is not a big deal. It's
Mhm.
like, oh yeah. When I told my 16-year-old niece that I was trans, she was like, yeah, okay. Right? Like it wasn't a big deal. But my sister, who was in her 50s, was like, and who is a lesbian, was like, I don't understand this. This is really hard for me.
I
So-
often say that teenagers of today are better equipped with emotional language than people my age.
Mhm.
And I'm older. They have much more versatility and depth when it comes to emotional language in general,
Mhm.
and are much cooler
Right.
about difference.
Right.
Way cooler, right? In general.
Yeah.
So that's not everybody, but that's my sense of my sense of the typical teenager is there's a lot of room for discussion and open-mindedness.
Right. And generationally, that has happened, right? Your generation, my generation, we've kind of continued to kind of open up our mind a little bit because we've had different experiences. But I also don't want to, again, broad stroke that, because there's a lot of kids who come into my facility who struggle just as I did 20-something years ago, right? And who are going through the same sufferings. The bullying that happened with me is different because when I went home at night, I had reprieve. These kids go home at night and bullying happens 24/7
On social media.
on social media and everything. So that's different, right? They're going through different things, and we have to catch up with them, and we have to and we still like have to be in the room with them. We still have to, ask them about their gender and sexuality, and kind of get into that conversation, and then also work. I mean, I work with young people, so then working with their families who are of an age that, like, of our generations and older,
Need a lot of help.
They need a lot of help.
So maybe they need the same help. And in terms of, there's a lot more to the discussion than transgender. There's also, you used other terms like gender fluid,
Non-binary.
non-binary. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what you mean?
Sure. So a lot of the times we're talking about transgender people, and we talk about binary trans people. So someone who is assigned male at birth identifies as female. So trans women. Assigned female at birth identifies as male. Trans men, right? And so it's almost like we're okay. We're almost like, if I'm going to put it on a meter, like, we're okay with trans people who identify in the binary, right, of male or female. That's easy for me, especially if they look, I'm putting air quotes in, look male or female. Of what I see is, it's more acceptable to look like Laverne Cox, right? Or, and walk in the world in that way. I can, the society as a whole can swallow that and kind of even almost celebrate it. But you have someone who is non-binary, let's say, or who maybe doesn't walk in the world as what society deems appropriate for what a man looks like, what a woman looks like, right? You have Jacob Tobiah, you have a couple of Asia Kate Dillon, the individuals who maybe look androgynous, and I want to say too, just caveat to that is that we don't know if somebody's non-binary unless we ask. We can't assume because they look androgynous that they're non-binary, right? Or that someone who walks in who looks on the street that I would say was like a 6'4" NFL football player might identify as non-binary. I don't know that unless I ask, right? So as clinicians, what we need to do, I'll get back to what non-binary means, is that taking away the treatment plans right upon what they look like when they walk in our door, right? We do the same thing. You look male, oh, you must, narcissism. We're already pathologizing narcissism, anger issues. Oh, female borderline, emotional dysregulation. We're going to set up the treatment plan for them before we even ask any questions. So, so a non-binary person, someone comes out to you as non-binary, is identifying not in male or female binary identities, right? So I can, I don't feel female or male. I can kind of live in this space of like, and non-binary doesn't mean, again, like just wearing gray clothes, and it's like it's like taking non-binary people, like, I think, even further the conversation of like, what is masculinity and what is femininity, and why are unisex clothes only masculine looking, right? Why can't they be dresses, and why can't men wear dresses? Why can't women wear these things, and how society plays gender?
So it goes to the discussion of asking the question with a lot, and this is the part I'm really, really honing in on, is what do I bring to the table as a clinician if I'm open, right? Gender expression, gender identity, right, could be, I have to listen to so many possibilities, right? And be open to, none of them are, there's no uh-ohs. There's no binary, gender binary is not an uh-oh, right? So, and that's the clinical piece that if people are listening, if you have an reaction, you got to do your own work, or say, this is not my space, right? So this is a question from our producer, what is queer identity?
Well, so again, when I'm asking all of these different identities, working with young people too, like they will come in with new gender identities and sexual orientations all the time, where when they do, and maybe I don't know, I've never heard of that, I'll be like, do you want me to Google that, or do you want to tell me what that is? Because I don't know. And so that I don't put the labor on them that I'll say I'll go do the work, but usually they like to tell me because they're young people, and anything that I don't know, they like to tell me. So, but like as like a queer identity, I would ask the client, again, what does that mean for you? Because queerness can mean so many things. It could mean something around, gender identity. It can mean around sexual orientation. It can be a political term where, like a taking back of a derogatory term. I could ask a group of 60-year-old gay men or talk about queerness, and it can produce a trauma response because they were beat up and they were called queer and all of that. And then I can talk to a younger person who I actually had a group where I had a bunch of young people who were like, we don't like the word queer. And I was like, what? Even my own expectation, I was like, how can you not like that term? And because I come from a political space of like, yeah, we take back that term. That's how I identify as queer. And what that means is just like, it's not heterosexual. It's just like, it's kind of an open-ended, like, I don't identify as gay. I don't identify as straight. I'm married to a cisgender female. Like, and to identify us as straight would be like taking away like all that I've worked for and who I am, and it doesn't resonate.
It's idiosyncratic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much an individual experience. And what I'm really picking up from you is that you're just open to the individual's experience, whatever it is, and there's not going to be any condemnation or criticism whatsoever. It's more of a curiosity and a safety. And that safety, I like the idea of getting better, but I mean, really what I mean is healing, symptom reduction, walking authentically. So when we say it's good to define this, getting better, how do I stand with authenticity and confidence, saying I am who I am, struggles and all, and I'm okay, right? Whether I have an anxiety disorder or trauma history, what is it going to take for me to feel okay about me and not be plagued, right, with the distress? So getting better in this context, including the fact that you've done nothing wrong, right? I like that. That was a good, you've done nothing wrong. You are not, in no way you're not, there's no bad in this. What does it look like when, and I appreciate the idea, if I'm in solitude about my issue, if I'm in a space of solitude, not even solitude, it's not the wrong word, that's almost healthy, isolation. If I'm all alone and feeling despair and loneliness, helplessness, and I start to reveal myself, right? When I walk in that door, my isolation that I've been practicing could look like substance use, could look like major depressive disorder, could look like PTSD-ish, right? It could look like profound anxiety, right? And complicated relationships, anger problems. I'm just speculating, right? That I can have a whole host of struggles that come with that profound isolation that you were describing, right? What does the healing process look like? What does it mean to quote unquote get better?
So I think it's really about finding tools to finding connection, number one, right? So sometimes I'll hear, well, we don't need an LGBT group because, we're past that, right? Everyone should be integrated, right? And it's like, cool, yeah, I'm integrated every day. Like my life, like I walk in the world. So I'm integrated every day. What happens when I create a space for a client, maybe a group, or find connection in a group setting so that they don't feel so alone? Because I can have a group of, like currently, I have a group of young people who meet, and it's a facilitated, peer-led kind of group, but they get in that group and they just go for it. They'll talk about anything from like sexual trauma to Cardi B. Like, I don't know, in like 10 minutes. Like, I don't know, it's like, I just let it go. It's safe. They could walk out of that room and not talk to each other for like the rest of the week, right? And connect with each other. But in that space, in that hour, they are connected. And so they don't feel so alone, right?
Is it connected through identification?
Mm-hmm.
So just like an alcoholic, right, who looks for identification with other alcoholics, somebody who's grieving, there are tons, phenomenal grief and loss,
Right.
groups, right?
Yeah.
I want to have identification.
Right.
So you're
Right.
connection through identification.
And in a healthy way. So, because I think the LGBT, and this is why 30 to 40% have addiction issues. The where we went to connect were the bars. Where we went to feel accepted were the bars. So it's like, how do I find that healthy space that is not like geared toward, drugs and alcohol and things like that that could lead down a whole further path when I'm when I'm feeling when I'm isolating or feel that deep loneliness. That's my go-to. So finding that healthy connection, finding, being that person that that client can talk to about all of this stuff, celebrating as a clinician, like celebrating, saying thank you. When someone comes out to you, your first response should say it should be thank you. Celebrating, we know all the baggage that's coming with it, right? We know all the stuff that's coming with it. So like in that moment and in times where we can celebrate, we talk about gender dysphoria a lot. I like to shift towards gender euphoria. What does it mean when I'm really feeling good in my body? What does it make me feel like? I went to lunch with someone, and he is early in the process of coming, as trans, and the server came up and said, "Hey, gentlemen, what can I get for you?" And then that moment, you just saw his face and kind of go, "Oh, yeah," like, it felt really good. And we had that moment to talk about it and say, what does that feel like for you to like have someone, really identify you as male, and that's how you've been wanting to identify this whole time, and kind of take those moments and build on those euphoric spaces.
So healing isn't about focusing exclusively on pain.
No.
It's about celebrating affirmation, celebrating my body, celebrating my courage, right? And so it's so interesting that we use treatment plans, quote unquote, right? Like, what is the treatment goal? To remove the pathology, right? To reduce the symptom. This is about celebrating the courage and the success,
right? I mean, that's what healing is, right? It's like it's walking through, and that's how we heal, is like through those pieces. So why not? I think we tend to I think as a business, as like as of treatment or therapy and therapists, is like we're so focused on the negative, and because that's what our clients come in with, and so they cannot always see the light, and it's our job to kind of bring that out sometimes, and also like just be in there with it, and it's uncomfortable, don't get me wrong. Like, when you're celebrating euphoria, it's real quick, and so sometimes I'm with a client and they'll be like, okay, shut up about it already, and I'm like, no, like, let's live in this moment, let's take it in, and like just get every drop of it, because we know we're so comfortable in the sadness.
I actually think that my sense of the work you do, correct me if I'm wrong, is oftentimes in addiction treatment, right, we have successes, and successes to me meaning, people really change their lives profoundly. They go from the depths of despair, what we call rock bottom, to a place of unrecognizable change, right? They look like the same person, but they don't look like the same person I see them 2 years later, right? It's unbelievable. It's profound, right? I would imagine that the numbers, I wish they were better, right? It's really hard to treat addiction. I would imagine that there's a lot of hope in loving, healing environments, and that if somebody is supported in the way that you're talking about, in the way that you do, you can actually have so many encounters of wow, right? I'm fortunate to bear witness to profound change. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. I was just talking to a kiddo the other day who's leaving, and known him for 10 months, right? And seeing, and just putting into the room and just saying like what a profound change I've seen, and like cannot wait for 2 years, 3 years down the road when he, starts his testosterone. He's doing the thing, right? He has all the appointments. He's getting ready to go on this journey.
The light's
and
on.
Celebrating that, Celebrating like someone going on hormones, and taking those moments of like rites of passage and making them a big deal, right? And being like, this is the day you're going to celebrate every year. And like, and making it and making it joyous.
But it's also not, that individual is so not alone.
Right.
Right. So the idea of, some people would say that all symptoms stem from isolation. All symptoms. It's a loneliness. There was actually a very good article about the treatment of addiction as being a loneliness problem, right? But I've heard even this. It's all problems stem from loneliness. So, just a couple of things before we wrap up. If you're going to suggest some readings or some trainings, that would be great. What would you pick 2 that you would suggest, if there are any that meet your criteria?
Yeah, I think. For workbooks, there's a couple of books out there that are one's by Alex Ian Toffey called Life Isn't Binary. And I think when we're having the conversation of non-binary identity, which is like probably a topic that you could probably do a whole hour on specifically, they would be the person to go to. And they're a therapist in Minnesota. They just came out with that book. And it's profound for therapists, so it kind of has a therapist lens. Stephanie Brill writes a book called The Transgender Teen that can be used for young adults as well, for clinicians and for families. There's a lot. There's a lot, and we can. Trainings. There's trainings. I think like find trainings in your area. There's always you can go on Eventbrite and find you can type in transgender. There's probably a training.
Now, just maybe you don't do this. I would imagine you do. If someone wanted to reach you specifically, do you provide training and consultation?
I do. Yes.
So
I should sell myself too. I do.
So yes, let's that whole celebration piece you were talking about. I'm going to celebrate you. So how do we reach you?
So you can find me on. Well, you can email me. It's bgcohen@visionsteen.com. You can always email me. I do trainings throughout LA, all over the country. And so that can happen. And if you ever need like consultation on a client or, even for yourself, like, I'm having, struggles here, I'm always glad to kind of help.
And just to wrap up, in seriousness, we had a long talk here. Right? Is this the type of talk you like having? Meaning as I'm, clinician listening and so forth, watching my process, is this the type of discussion that helps treatment?
Yeah. I think that this is the best kind of conversation to have, is being in a space. And I try to create that when I do bigger trainings, as well as creating the space of, this is the time to ask the question. That question that is so uncomfortable that you think that is the stupidest question and it makes you the worst human being in the whole world by even thinking that question. That's the question. Ask it, because that's the block. That's going to be the block that keeps you from helping others.
So what I took out of this is, right, don't be afraid, clinician, if you don't have information, of being exposed, right? Or, hey, we nailed you, right? Ask the question. Ask the question. And I'm also adding to it, identify your own biases, right? I would add that too, very, very important, and your own ideas. Start asking yourself the same questions.
Right. And it's okay if you don't check the box on Psychology Today that you work with this population if you don't work with them, or if you're not ready to work with them. Because I think that one of the worst things we can do for a client is them walking in with their walls kind of being down and expecting to get help, and then having that space to be like, oh, this isn't the right therapist. But like, at the same time, if you want to work with this population, do your due diligence.
Can I give you a compliment?
Yeah.
You are so good at this.
Thank you.
You are so good at teaching and representing in a non-punitive, you practice what you preach, just like I'm imagining the client in your group or in your office, not there's no shame, right?
I'm not into shame therapy.
Right, and you're not going to do it to that's just your vibe.
No.
And I appreciate it, and I thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This should not be considered treatment advice, nor is it a substitute for an individual treatment plan. If you have questions or concerns about your individual situation, it is strongly recommended you consult a licensed professional to talk about things that are specific to you. If there's an emergency, it is strongly recommended you seek treatment at your nearest emergency room.